Frank Doyle had built his entire life around appearances. To his neighbors, he was the steady man in uniform, the dependable officer who patrolled their streets and waved politely at children riding bikes. At home, he was the husband who mowed the lawn every Saturday and the father who showed up at school events with a practiced smile. Every detail of his existence was designed to look perfect, and he guarded that image with the same intensity he brought to his work. But behind the calm exterior lay a storm of contradictions, and at the center of it was his unshakable prejudice. He had grown up with ideas that divided people by skin color, and those beliefs shaped how he spoke, how he judged others, and how he carried out his duty. Yet those same beliefs began to collapse when he noticed Maya Johnson. Maya was different from anyone Frank had ever allowed into his world. She was young, ambitious, and unafraid to stand out in the quiet suburban neighborhood. Her laughter carried through her open windows on warm evenings, and her presence unsettled Frank in ways he could not explain. At first, he dismissed his interest as simple curiosity, but the more he saw of her, the harder it became to ignore. She walked with a confidence that drew his eyes, and her independence reminded him of something he had never experienced at home: freedom. Each time he caught sight of her, the conflict inside him grew sharper. He despised the fact that he wanted her, yet he could not turn away. What started as harmless glances from his yard became lingering moments. He found reasons to step outside when she was near, casually striking up small interactions that appeared innocent to anyone watching. Slowly, those encounters deepened. He learned that she had moved into the neighborhood to escape the chaos of city life, hoping to focus on her career and personal growth. He also learned that she lived alone, which only fueled the dangerous attraction he was trying to suppress. The secrecy of their exchanges gave Frank an adrenaline rush he hadn't felt in years. When the affair finally began, it happened almost naturally, as if both of them had crossed a line without fully realizing it. For Frank, the thrill was intoxicating. Every meeting with Maya was a chance to step outside the suffocating cage of his own life. He told himself it was temporary, that he was still in control, but the truth was different. He had built his entire reputation on discipline and authority, yet with Maya, all of that unraveled. Each night he spent in her company deepened his obsession, and each lie he told his family wove him tighter into a web of deceit. Frank believed he could manage it all, that his mask of perfection was strong enough to hide the secret burning just beneath the surface. What he didn't realize was how fragile that mask truly was, and how one wrong move would shatter everything he had spent a lifetime protecting. For Frank, the relationship with Maya was no longer just a secret. It had become the pulse of his life. He structured his days around moments when he could slip away without drawing suspicion. At work, he was the same sharp, respected officer, but the moment his shift ended, his mind wandered to thoughts of Maya. He told his wife he was working late or being called in for extra patrols, excuses that allowed him to cross the narrow strip of grass separating their homes. Each lie carried risk, but the risk itself only seemed to fuel his desire. The affair was no longer a choice. It was a compulsion. Maya at first enjoyed the attention. After moving into a new neighborhood where she knew no one, the connection gave her a sense of excitement she hadn't expected. Frank seemed protective, attentive, and eager to make her feel wanted. Yet over time, she began to see sides of him that unsettled her. His compliments were laced with possessiveness, and his tone shifted whenever she mentioned friends or plans that didn't include him. He wanted to control when she was available, as if her time belonged to him alone. The initial thrill gave way to unease, though she tried to brush it aside, convincing herself she could manage the situation. Frank's behavior became more erratic as the weeks passed. His phone buzzed constantly with messages to Maya, sometimes demanding explanations for her silence, other times insisting she see him immediately. He hovered near her house, inventing reasons to check on things in the yard or loitering in his patrol car just a block away. The same man who appeared calm and authoritative in uniform was unraveling in private. His obsession blurred the line between desire and control, and Maya could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. The contradictions inside Frank grew sharper each day. His career and reputation depended on discipline, but with Maya, his actions were reckless and desperate. Worse, the racism he carried for years clashed with his need for her. He spoke harshly about people who looked like her, while simultaneously sneaking into her bed at night. The hypocrisy only deepened his anger, leaving him constantly on edge. He hated the part of himself that wanted her, but he hated the idea of losing her even more. The conflict turned him into someone unpredictable, capable of shifting from charm to rage in an instant. Maya began to sense that she was no longer involved in a simple affair, but trapped in something far darker. Frank's grip on her life tightened, and the danger became harder to ignore. She realized he was not a man she could simply walk away from, no matter how much she wanted to reclaim her peace. By then, the affair was no longer a secret escape for either of them. It was a dangerous bond that threatened to spiral beyond their control. ChatGPT said, "The first signs of danger appeared when whispers began to circulate in the police department. Frank had been careless one evening, parking his car too close to Maya's house and staying longer than usual. A fellow officer noticed and later mentioned it casually during a shift, planting a seed of suspicion Frank couldn't ignore. From that moment, the walls he had built to protect his double life began to close in. He replayed every movement in his mind, every visit, every excuse he had offered at home. The fear of being discovered gnawed at him, but instead of stepping back, he tightened his grip on the situation. Determined to silence any rumors, Frank attempted to pull away from Maya. He convinced himself that ending the affair quickly would restore the control he was losing. But when he tried to distance himself, Maya resisted. She had invested more into the relationship than he expected, and she wasn't willing to let him vanish without explanation. Her refusal unsettled him, but what truly terrified Frank was when she revealed that she had proof of their affair. Photos taken discreetly on her phone, messages he had sent in moments of weakness, even recordings of their private conversations, evidence that could destroy his career and his family in an instant. The revelation shook him. His entire life had been constructed on the foundation of reputation and respectability. A single exposure could unravel everything, stripping him of his badge, his marriage, and the community's trust. His fear of disgrace twisted into anger, and his obsession with control deepened. Frank confronted Maya, trying to intimidate her into silence. He told her that speaking out would ruin not just him but her as well, warning that no one would believe her side of the story against a decorated police officer. But Maya was unmoved. For the first time, Frank realized that he could not manipulate her as easily as he thought. The shift in power rattled him. All his life he had believed in his authority, on the job, at home, in every relationship. Now, in the confines of a hidden affair, he was powerless. The evidence in Maya's possession was a weapon that threatened the very core of his identity. He began to spiral, consumed by thoughts of what would happen if the truth came out. Each day felt like a countdown toward exposure, and each interaction with Maya grew more tense. As the pressure mounted, Frank's paranoia became unbearable. He checked his phone constantly, waiting for a message that would confirm his worst fear. He scoured his surroundings for signs that someone was watching him. His once orderly life was unraveling thread by thread, and in the middle of that unraveling stood Maya, unwilling to bend to his threats. In his mind, she was no longer just a lover. She was a danger that had to be neutralized. The first threat had emerged, and with it came the dark realization that the secret he had fought to protect might demand a price far more terrible than he ever imagined. On the night Frank decided to act, the sky was heavy with rain, the kind of weather that seemed to erase footprints and silence the world. He had been pacing his living room for hours, rehearsing the steps in his mind. His wife thought he was at work, and his children were asleep, unaware of the storm brewing just beyond their safe home. Every detail of his plan was meant to eliminate risk. He chose gloves to avoid leaving prints, dark clothing to blend into the shadows, and a weapon small enough to hide yet lethal enough to finish what he intended. By the time he stepped out into the wet night, he had convinced himself it was the only way to protect his life from collapse. Maya, however, had sensed this coming. The tension between them had reached a boiling point after their last confrontation, and she no longer trusted him. She had acted quickly, sharing her evidence with a close friend earlier that day. Her instincts told her that Frank was not a man who would accept defeat, and she prepared for the worst even though she hoped it might never arrive. When she heard the faint creak of her back door that night, the confirmation was chilling. Frank moved through her house with precision, his heart pounding in rhythm with the rain against the windows. Every step was deliberate, his mind locked on the image of silencing her once and for all. Yet the moment he confronted Maya, the plan unraveled. She fought with a ferocity he hadn't anticipated, clawing, striking, and resisting with all her strength. The struggle was violent, chaotic, and fueled by fear on both sides. Frank had always been in control, But in that moment, control slipped from his hands. The sounds of their fight echoed through the small house, a collision of desperation and survival. In the end, Frank's strength overpowered her. The weapon he carried delivered the final act, leaving Maya lifeless on the floor of the home she had once believed would give her peace. For a long time, Frank stood frozen, staring at what he had done, his breathing ragged and uneven. The rain outside masked the pounding in his ears, but it could not wash away the reality of his crime. Snapping back into focus, he scrambled to stage the scene. He shattered a window to mimic forced entry, scattered belongings to make it look like a burglary gone wrong, and carefully wiped surfaces to erase any trace of himself. Every motion was mechanical, driven by training and desperation. When he finally stepped back out into the storm, he carried the belief that he had buried his secret along with Maya. But what Frank didn't know was that the chain of evidence had already been set in motion. The proof Maya entrusted to her friend was safe, waiting to expose him. His careful staging would not shield him from the truth forever. Though he believed he had committed the perfect crime, the cracks in his plan had already begun to show, and those cracks would soon widen into a collapse he could not escape. For a brief period after Maya's death, Frank allowed himself to believe that he had erased every trace of his involvement. He carried himself with the same authority he always had, arriving at work in his neatly pressed uniform, greeting neighbors with calm assurance, and sitting at his family's dinner table as if nothing had changed. The staged break-in at Maya's home convinced him he had outsmarted everyone. He even attended the community's candlelight vigil for her, standing among grieving neighbors with a solemn face, pretending to be just another man mourning the loss of a young woman taken too soon. But behind his mask of composure, fear was always there, pressing against him like a shadow he could not escape. The investigation began to unravel his illusion more quickly than he expected. Detectives noticed details that didn't align with the supposed burglary. There were no signs of valuables missing, and the precision with which certain areas were disturbed seemed suspiciously staged. Forensics revealed smudges on surfaces that suggested careful wiping, a sign that the intruder knew how evidence could be collected. What Frank thought of as clever misdirection became red flags for seasoned investigators. Still, his position as a respected police officer initially shielded him. Few wanted to believe one of their own could be involved in such a brutal crime. That protection shattered when Maya's friend came forward with the evidence she had safeguarded. The texts, the photos, and the voice recordings told a story that Frank could no longer deny. His private life was laid bare, the secret meetings, the obsessive messages, the escalating anger. The affair painted a clear motive, and the trail of desperation pointed directly to him. Once those files reached investigators, the case shifted from speculation to certainty. The man who had once carried the authority of the law was now the primary suspect in a murder case. The arrest was a spectacle that shook the community. Neighbors who had admired Frank's discipline watched in disbelief as he was led from his home in handcuffs. His wife and children, blindsided by the revelations, became unwilling casualties of the double life he had chosen. In court, prosecutors dismantled the image he had spent decades building. They detailed his racism, his hypocrisy, and the dangerous obsession that had driven him to take a life. The jury heard not only about the affair, but also about the violent struggle that ended in Maya's death. Every piece of evidence stripped away the respect he once commanded. Frank's downfall was complete when the verdict was read. Convicted of murder, he faced a sentence that guaranteed he would never again walk freely through the streets he once patrolled. The uniform that had symbolized power and authority was replaced with prison clothes, and the title of officer became a reminder of betrayal. For the community, the case left scars that would not fade quickly. A man who had sworn to protect them had instead become a predator in their midst. For Maya, the justice delivered came too late, her life cut short by a man who refused to let go of his secrets. For Frank, the cost of his obsession was everything he had ever claimed to value: his career, his family, and his freedom, lost forever in the name of control and silence.